I've always been cautious about selling things online, especially on Facebook Marketplace. But when bills started piling up and I had to sell my beloved PlayStation, I had no choice. I posted the ad, and within minutes, I got a message from someone named Chris. He seemed friendly enough, offering a decent price. He even offered to pick it up from my place, which I initially thought was convenient. We agreed to meet at my apartment the next evening. Chris arrived right on time, driving a white van. He was tall, in his early 30s, with an easy smile that quickly put me at ease. I invited him in, and he immediately started examining the PlayStation. "This looks great. Do you mind if I test it?" he asked, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Sure, go ahead," I replied, gesturing to the TV. As he set it up, we chatted casually about video games and life in general. Everything seemed normal, almost too normal. After a few minutes, Chris nodded approvingly. "Works perfectly. Thanks. Let me grab the money from my van." I waited in the living room, feeling a sense of relief that the transaction was going smoothly. But when he returned, he was holding a small black bag instead of cash. "Mind if I show you something really cool?" he asked, his tone suddenly unnervingly calm. Before I could respond, he took a cloth from his bag. My heart raced as I realized what was happening. I backed away, my mind scrambling for a plan, but Chris lunged at me with frightening speed. I smelled an extremely strong smell, and the darkness quickly swallowed me. When I woke up, I was in the back of his van, wrists and ankles bound with zip ties. My head throbbed, and my vision was blurry. The van's engine roared as we sped down an unknown road. Panic surged through me. "Let me go!" I screamed, struggling against my restraints. But Chris just glanced at me through the rearview mirror, a twisted smile on his face. "You shouldn't have trusted a stranger," he said coldly. "You're going to help me with something very important." Hours passed, though it felt like an eternity. The van finally came to a stop, and Chris dragged me out. We were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense forest. My heart pounded as he forced me into an old, decrepit cabin. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of decay. I gagged as he shoved me into a small, dark room and locked the door. The room was empty, save for a single, flickering light bulb hanging from the ceiling. My mind raced as I tried to figure out how to escape. Days blurred together. Chris would come in occasionally, bringing me minimal food and water. He never spoke much, just watched me with those cold, calculating eyes. I tried to reason with him, but he was completely unhinged. One day, he entered the room with a disturbing calmness. "We're going to play a game," he said, holding a knife. "If you can find your way out of this forest, I'll let you go." He cut the zip ties and shoved me out the door. My legs were weak, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I ran, heart pounding through the dense trees, tripping over roots and branches. I could hear Chris's footsteps behind me, steady and unrelenting. The forest seemed endless, and my hope was dwindling. But then I saw a glimmer of light through the trees, a road. I sprinted towards it with everything I had. Just as I broke through the tree line, a car was passing by. I waved frantically, and the driver screeched to a halt. I collapsed beside the car, gasping for breath. The driver, a kind, elderly man, helped me into the passenger seat. "Are you okay? What happened? Please, just drive. Now!" I begged. He didn't ask any more questions and sped off. Through the rearview mirror, I saw Chris standing at the edge of the forest, his eyes burning with rage. The man took me to the nearest police station, where I recounted my harrowing ordeal. A search team was sent to the forest, but they found no trace of Chris or the cabin. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I never fully recovered from the trauma. The PlayStation, the catalyst of my nightmare, was never seen again. I moved to a new city, changed my number. I've always been a cautious person. Selling my old phone on Facebook Marketplace wasn't something I did lightly, but I needed the money, and it seemed like an easy way to make a quick buck. I posted the ad, and within hours, I received a message from a potential buyer. He was eager, polite, and willing to pay my asking price without haggling. His name was Daniel. He insisted on picking up the phone from my house, which made me a bit uneasy. I preferred meeting in public places, but he seemed trustworthy enough based on his profile. Plus, his eagerness was flattering. He said he needed a new phone urgently because his old one had just broken. I agreed to meet him at 6 p.m. As the time approached, I started to feel a little anxious. I had heard stories about scammers and thieves, but I brushed them off, thinking I was just being paranoid. I double-checked that everything was ready. The phone was wiped clean, factory reset, and neatly placed in its original box with the charger and earphones. At exactly 6 p.m., the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Daniel standing there, smiling. He was a tall man, neatly dressed, and seemed pleasant enough. He thanked me for agreeing to sell the phone to him and complimented my house. His charm was disarming. "Do you mind if I check the phone quickly?" he asked. "Of course," I replied, handing him the box. He took it, examining the phone closely. I watched as he powered it on and navigated through the settings, making sure everything was in order. "This is perfect," he said, smiling. "Just what I needed." He pulled out his wallet and handed me the cash. I counted it quickly. It was the exact amount we had agreed upon. As I was about to hand him the phone, he suddenly looked over my shoulder into the house. "Wow, you have a really nice place," he said. "Mind if I use your restroom before I leave? It's a bit of a drive back for me." His request caught me off guard, but I didn't see the harm in it. "Sure, it's just down the hall to the right." He thanked me and walked into the house, leaving me standing awkwardly at the doorway. I could hear him moving around, and after a minute or so, I decided to close the door and wait in the living room. Minutes passed, and I started to feel uneasy. Why was he taking so long? Just as I was about to call out to him, I heard a noise from the bedroom. My heart skipped a beat. I rushed down the hall, calling his name, but there was no response. I reached the bedroom and froze. Drawers were open, things were scattered everywhere, and Daniel was nowhere to be seen. I ran to the front door. It was wide open. My heart pounded as I realized what had happened. I quickly checked my belongings. My laptop, jewelry, and several other valuable items were missing. Panic set in as I ran through the house, confirming the worst. He had taken everything he could carry in those few minutes. I called the police immediately, trying to keep my voice steady as I explained what had happened. They arrived quickly and took my statement, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. They asked for his profile details, and I showed them our conversation on Facebook Marketplace. After they left, I sat on the couch, feeling violated and foolish. How could I have let this happen? I replayed the events in my head, trying to figure out what I had missed. But the truth was simple. I had trusted someone I shouldn't have. Days passed and the police followed up with me, but there were no leads. Daniel's profile had been deactivated, and it seemed he had vanished without a trace. I felt helpless, knowing that my belongings were gone, and that I had been so easily deceived. The experience left me shaken, and I became much more cautious in the following months. I stopped using online marketplaces for a while, too scared to trust anyone. The memory of that night haunted me, a constant reminder of how easily things can go wrong. It's been a year since that incident, and I've slowly regained my confidence. But every time I think about selling something online, I can't help but feel a knot in my stomach. Trust is a fragile thing, and once it's broken, it's hard to repair. It started like any other Facebook Marketplace transaction. I was selling my old bike, a solid mountain model that had seen better days, but was still in decent condition. With a new one already in my garage, it was time to let the old one go. After a few inquiries, I settled on a buyer. His name was Mark. He seemed eager and polite in our messages, the kind of buyer every seller hopes for. We agreed to meet at a nearby park in the late afternoon. It was a public place, which felt safer than having a stranger come to my home. Mark said he lived nearby and suggested meeting at a specific spot by the picnic tables. I packed up the bike and headed out, checking my phone for any last-minute messages. Nothing. It seemed straightforward enough. As I arrived at the park, the sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the grassy fields. I spotted the picnic tables and saw a man standing next to a silver SUV. He waved as I approached, and I guessed it was Mark. He was tall, with a muscular build, dressed in a hoodie and jeans. Something about his presence felt off, but I shrugged it off as nerves. "Hey, you must be Mark," I said, forcing a smile. "Yeah, that's me, and you must be Emma," he replied, his voice warm but his eyes cold. "Let's take a look at that bike." I unloaded the bike from my car and handed it to him. He inspected it closely, running his fingers over the frame and checking the gears. He seemed satisfied. "Looks great," he said. "Do you mind if I take it for a quick spin?" "Not at all," I replied, trying to hide my relief that the deal seemed to be going well. He hopped on the bike and rode it around the park for a few minutes. As he returned, he had a strange smile on his face. "I'll take it," he said. "Let's load it into my SUV and I'll give you the cash." We lifted the bike together, and he opened the back of his SUV. As I was pushing the bike, I felt a blow to my head. My vision quickly became blurred, and I felt myself losing consciousness. When I came to, I was in a dark, confined space. It smelled damp and musty. My hands were tied behind my back, and I was gagged. Panic set in as I realized I was in the trunk of Mark's SUV. The vehicle was moving, bouncing on what felt like a rough road. I struggled against the bindings, but they were tight. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make sense of what was happening. Why would someone kidnap me over a bike? The minutes felt like hours as the SUV continued its journey. Eventually it came to a stop, and I heard the driver's door open and close. Footsteps approached the back of the SUV. The trunk opened, and Mark's face appeared, illuminated by the faint glow of a flashlight. "Welcome back," he said with a twisted smile. "We're going to have some fun." I tried to scream, but the gag muffled my cries. He reached in, grabbed me by the arm, and pulled me out. We were in a remote area, surrounded by dense woods. There was a small, decrepit cabin nearby. Mark dragged me toward it, ignoring my futile attempts to resist. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with the smell of decay. He pushed me into a corner and secured my hands to a rusty pipe. The room was dimly lit by a single, flickering light bulb. In the corner, I could see old, blood-stained tools. My heart sank as the realization of my situation hit me. This wasn't just a kidnapping. Mark had much darker plans. He stood over me, his eyes gleaming with a sadistic excitement. "You know, I've always wanted to meet someone like you," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "Selling things online is so risky. You never know who you're going to meet." Tears streamed down my face as I struggled against the bindings. Mark just laughed, enjoying my terror. He picked up a knife from the table and approached me, the blade glinting in the dim light. "You're going to make a great project," he said, his voice calm and steady. "But don't worry, I'll make sure you last a long time." As he raised the knife, I closed my eyes, bracing for the worst. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from outside. Mark froze, his attention diverted. I heard voices shouting and the sound of footsteps approaching the cabin. The door burst open, and 2 police officers stormed in, their guns drawn. "Drop the weapon," one of them shouted. Mark hesitated for a moment before dropping the knife and raising his hands. The officers quickly subdued him and freed me from the pipe. It turned out that my friend had been tracking our messages and noticed when I stopped responding. Worried, she contacted the police and provided them with all the information she had. They managed to trace my phone signal to the remote area and arrived just in time. As I was led out of the cabin and into the safety of the police car, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of relief and gratitude. The nightmare was over, but the scars of that day would remain with me forever. I've always been cautious with online sales, especially when dealing with strangers on Facebook Marketplace. I thought I'd be safe enough meeting in public places and staying alert. But nothing could have prepared me for the horror I encountered last week. It was a typical Saturday afternoon when I decided to sell my old cell phone. I posted a detailed ad, took high-quality photos, and set a fair price. Within minutes, I received a message from someone named Adam. His profile picture showed a friendly-looking guy in his 30s with short brown hair and a welcoming smile. He seemed polite and eager to buy the phone for his daughter, mentioning he needed it urgently for her birthday. We agreed to meet at a local coffee shop, a place I frequented and felt comfortable in. As I drove there, I felt a slight unease but brushed it off as pre-sale jitters. When I arrived, I scanned the area and spotted Adam sitting at a corner table, his eyes glued to his phone. I approached him, and he greeted me warmly. "Hi, you must be Sarah," he said, standing up and extending his hand. His grip was firm, but not too strong. "Yes, nice to meet you, Adam," I replied, trying to mask my uneasiness with a smile. We exchanged pleasantries, and he asked to see the phone. I handed it over, and he inspected it meticulously, asking several questions about its condition and features. Everything seemed normal, but something about the way he kept glancing around the cafe made me uneasy. After a few minutes, he seemed satisfied. "Looks great, but I forgot to bring cash. My house is just around the corner. Would you mind driving me there? I can pay you and give you a tip for the trouble." Every instinct in my body screamed no, but I didn't want to seem rude or paranoid. I agreed, telling myself it would just take a few minutes. As we walked to my car, I noticed his demeanor change slightly. The friendly smile remained, but there was a coldness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Once inside the car, I drove as he directed. We left the busy streets and entered a quieter neighborhood. He pointed to a house at the end of a cul-de-sac. It looked normal enough, but there was something off about it. The windows were covered with thick curtains and no cars were parked in the driveway. I parked, and he motioned for me to follow him inside. "It'll just take a second. I have the cash in my office." Reluctantly, I followed. The moment I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me, and I felt a sharp pain in my neck. Everything went black. When I regained consciousness, I found myself tied to a chair in a dimly lit basement. My head throbbed, and panic surged through me. I struggled against the ropes, but they were too tight. In the corner of the room, Adam was rummaging through a bag, humming to himself. "Ah, you're awake," he said cheerfully, turning to face me. The friendly demeanor was gone, replaced by a chilling, detached expression. "You know, I've been looking for someone like you for a while. Someone who wouldn't be missed right away." "What do you want from me?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. He chuckled. "It's not about what I want from you. It's about what I can make you into." Terror gripped me as he approached, holding a scalpel. "I've been practicing, you see, learning how to turn people into art. You'll be my masterpiece." I screamed, struggling desperately against the ropes. He laughed, enjoying my fear. "No one can hear you down here. It's just you and me." He began to cut, making shallow incisions on my arms. The pain was excruciating, and I felt my strength waning. Just as I was about to lose consciousness again, I heard a loud crash from upstairs. "Police! Freeze!" Adam's face twisted with rage and panic. He grabbed a nearby chair and hurled it at the door, but it was too late. Several officers stormed in, guns drawn. They subdued him quickly, and one of them rushed to my side, untying the ropes and calling for medical assistance. As I was carried out of that nightmare, I learned that my friends had tracked my phone using the Find My iPhone app and alerted the authorities when I didn't return their calls. They had saved my life. The ordeal left me with physical and emotional scars, but I was grateful to be alive.